My neighbors thought they were getting away with something clever. I thought they were just being rude. Turns out, they were stealing from me every single day. And the funny part is they picked the worst possible person to steal water from. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 67 years old, and before retirement I spent 38 years designing groundwater systems and municipal water infrastructure across northern Arizona. Water has been my career, my hobby, and honestly, probably my biggest obsession. Most people can look at a pressure gauge and see a number. I look at the same gauge and see a story. My wife used to joke that I trusted flow meters more than people. And after everything that happened out here, I can't really argue with her. Back in 2009, long before this area started filling up with expensive subdivisions, I bought just under 2 acres outside Prescott. The realtor kept apologizing for how isolated it was. But isolation was exactly what I wanted. I wasn't looking for neighbors. I was looking for peace. The land had beautiful juniper trees, a small ridge that caught the evening sunset perfectly, and enough room to build the workshop I'd always dreamed about. The only challenge was water. There wasn't a municipal connection anywhere nearby, which scared off most buyers. That never bothered me because I knew exactly what sat hundreds of feet below the ground. I hired a drilling crew, supervised every step myself, and after reaching a little over 600 feet, we hit one of the cleanest aquifers I'd seen in decades. It wasn't luck, it was geology. The well cost me more money than my first house, but I never regretted it for a second. That well became the heartbeat of my property. Every valve, every pipe, every pressure regulator was installed exactly the way I wanted because I knew one thing most people didn't. Good water systems don't fail suddenly. They give you tiny warnings long before disaster arrives. If you're paying attention, for over 10 years life stayed wonderfully predictable. I'd wake up early, drink coffee on the porch, work in my shop restoring old woodworking tools, and occasionally help nearby ranchers troubleshoot their pumps. Retirement wasn't exciting, but after spending decades dealing with city councils and emergency infrastructure failures, boring felt like a luxury. Then, everything changed. Around 2021, construction crews started showing up less than half a mile away. Trees disappeared. Bulldozers arrived. Concrete trucks rolled in every morning before sunrise. Within a year, an upscale neighborhood called Cedar Ridge Estates seemed to appear almost overnight. 80-something brand-new homes, perfectly trimmed landscaping, matching mailboxes, decorative stone entrances, the whole picture-perfect suburban package. I figured we'd simply wave at each other from a distance. Instead, one afternoon there was a knock at my front door. Standing there was a woman named Melissa Grant. She looked to be in her mid-30s, dressed like she had just stepped out of a real estate commercial. Designer sunglasses resting on her head even though she was standing in my shade. She introduced herself as president of the neighborhood association and smiled the kind of smile that looked professionally practiced. "Mr. Brooks, we're hoping you might be willing to help the community for a little while," she said. She explained that delays with the development's permanent water infrastructure had left the subdivision in a difficult position. They needed temporary access to a reliable water source while permits and inspections were being finalized. "Just for a few months," she assured me. "We'd really appreciate a good neighbor." Now, maybe I was old-fashioned, but I grew up believing communities work best when people help each other. I wasn't interested in squeezing anyone for money. We drew up a simple temporary agreement, enough to protect both sides, and I let them connect under specific conditions. I remember thinking my father would have approved. He always said the easiest way to have good neighbors was to be one first. For a while, everything seemed perfectly fine. Then one cold February morning, I walked out to my back field carrying a shovel because I planned to transplant a few young trees. And instead I found a pile of construction debris dumped along my fence line. Broken lumber, plastic wrapping, insulation scraps. Nothing dangerous, just enough to make the place look like a landfill. I assumed one of the contractors had made an honest mistake, so I cleaned it up myself and didn't even bother making a phone call. Everybody gets one free pass in my book. 2 weeks later, I found another pile, this one much bigger. Chunks of concrete, twisted pieces of rebar, broken drywall, empty buckets that still smelled like fresh paint. That wasn't an accident anymore. Somebody knew exactly where they were dumping, and they also knew it wasn't their property. I took photographs, loaded everything into my trailer, and still chose not to escalate. Looking back, maybe that was my mistake. Maybe kindness sometimes gets mistaken for weakness. Then came the third time. And before the sun went down that same afternoon, an email landed in my inbox that changed everything. If you'd like to know what Melissa wrote and why that single message convinced me someone had been stealing from me for months without realizing whose system they were connected to, the email was short, which somehow made it even more insulting. It read, "Mr. Brooks, you should appreciate everything our association has done to maintain the water system you're benefiting from. We'd also appreciate it if you stopped complaining about harmless construction materials being left on your property." I must have read those two sentences half a dozen times. Then I laughed, not because they were funny, but because they revealed something Melissa never intended to reveal. She actually believed her own story. She honestly thought her neighborhood had some claim over a water system I had personally designed, paid for, and maintained for more than a decade. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was curiosity. Engineers are strange that way. When something doesn't make sense, we don't usually argue first. We investigate. I walked out to the well house that afternoon with my old notebook, unlocked the steel door, and just stood there listening to the pump cycle on and off. After 40 years around mechanical equipment, you learn to hear things other people miss. The pumps seemed to be working harder than it should have. Nothing dramatic, just slightly longer run times, slightly different recovery intervals. Most homeowners would have never noticed. I did. That evening, I dug through every folder I'd kept since the well was drilled. The original geological survey, the drilling records, county permits, water rights documentation, utility easements. Every page confirmed exactly what I already knew. The well belonged to me. The land belonged to me. The pipeline crossing my property belonged to me. The temporary connection agreement allowed limited use while permanent infrastructure was completed. It certainly didn't give anyone ownership, management authority, or permission to expand the system without my approval. The next morning, I called my attorney, an old friend named Richard Hale. We'd known each other nearly 20 years. I didn't tell him someone was stealing water. I simply asked, "Richard, if someone believes they own something because they've been using it long enough, does that make it true?" He chuckled. "Depends. Why do I have a feeling this question involves your well?" I filled him in on everything, including the debris and Melissa's email. There was a long pause before he finally said, "Don't accuse anyone yet. Collect evidence. Lots of it." That happened to be my favorite kind of assignment. Over the next several weeks, I quietly upgraded the entire monitoring system. I installed commercial-grade digital flow meters with remote logging capabilities, added pressure sensors throughout the distribution line, replaced older valves with electronically controlled smart valves, mounted motion-activated cameras covering every access point, and connected everything to software that time-stamped every gallon flowing through the system. Most people picture retirement as fishing or golfing. Apparently mine had become a forensic engineering project. Every morning I'd pour myself coffee, open my laptop, and review the overnight data like I was back managing a municipal utility. Patterns started appearing almost immediately. Peak consumption matched the neighborhood's morning routines. Another spike appeared around dinner time. Long irrigation kicked in with almost military precision during the evenings. Whoever had configured their schedules clearly liked automation. They just forgot automation leaves fingerprints. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. I never confronted anyone because every additional day strengthened my case. Patience is one advantage age gives you. Younger people often think justice comes from acting fast. Experience teaches you that justice usually comes from acting at exactly the right moment. During those months, I occasionally ran into homeowners from Cedar Ridge Estates. Nice people, honestly. Families walking dogs. Kids riding bicycles. One older couple even brought me homemade peach cobbler after I helped jumpstart their truck one afternoon. None of them acted like thieves because none of them knew anything had been stolen. They believed they were paying legitimate HOA dues covering legitimate community utilities. Melissa had built an entire narrative for them, and nobody had reason to question it. One Saturday, a young father named Kevin stopped by while I was repairing a fence. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "I've always wondered where our water comes from. Pretty amazing system they built." I almost answered. Instead, I smiled and said, "It's definitely an interesting system." That conversation stayed with me all evening because I realized the real victims weren't just me. 80-plus families had been unknowingly paying monthly fees based on a lie. Melissa wasn't simply taking my water. She was selling my water while pretending it belonged to the association. 8 months after I started monitoring everything, the final report appeared on my screen. Total unmetered usage routed through the temporary connection: 673,418 gallons. I stared at the number for several minutes. even though I'd watched it grow every day. Seeing the final total still felt surreal. Then I calculated the replacement value, infrastructure wear, maintenance costs, electrical consumption, and commercial utility rates. The amount wasn't small anymore. It represented a deliberate business decision, not an oversight. Richard came over that weekend. We spread every document across my dining room table: camera stills, digital logs, water flow charts, copies of county records, Melissa's email claiming they maintained my system, the temporary agreement. We arranged everything in chronological order until the entire table looked like an evidence board from a detective movie. Richard leaned back, folded his arms, and smiled. "Ethan, I don't think I've ever seen a cleaner civil case. We filed claims covering unauthorized utility use, theft of services, property damage, and reimbursement for maintenance expenses. But we weren't finished." Richard asked me one question before submitting everything. "Do you want to surprise Melissa, or do you want the truth to reach the people actually paying for this?" I didn't hesitate. The homeowners deserve to know first. So instead of letting rumors spread, we prepared informational packets summarizing the documented facts. No insults, no exaggerations, just evidence. Copies of the temporary agreement, photographs of the illegal dumping, usage graphs, public property records, Melissa's own email. We mailed one to every homeowner in Cedar Ridge Estates. 3 days later, the neighborhood exploded. My phone never stopped ringing. Some people apologized before introducing themselves. Others wanted to see the monitoring equipment with their own eyes. One elderly woman stood on my porch fighting back tears because she and her husband had spent years carefully budgeting every dollar of their retirement, never imagining part of their HOA fees had been built around resources the association didn't even own. By the end of that week, local television stations were calling. Reporters love stories involving neighborhood politics because everyone secretly imagines it could happen where they live. I agreed to one interview on one condition. I wasn't interested in embarrassing residents. I wanted the focus to stay on accountability. The story aired on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning, county officials had opened inquiries into utility compliance, and the state real estate licensing board confirmed they were reviewing complaints connected to Melissa's conduct. That's when everything changed, because for the first time since this started, Melissa stopped sending emails. She stopped making demands. Instead, she asked if she could come to my house and discuss possible resolutions. And when I saw the black SUV pull into my driveway the following Monday with Melissa sitting silently beside an attorney, I knew the balance of power had finally shifted. I watched the SUV roll slowly on my driveway, shut off the engine, and sit there for almost a full minute before either door opened. Funny how confidence always seems to disappear during that last 60 seconds. Melissa finally stepped out, followed by a man in a gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. The same woman who had once emailed me like I was an inconvenience suddenly couldn't make eye contact. I invited them onto the porch instead of into the house. That wasn't meant to be rude. My wife always believed important conversations should happen where everyone can see the horizon, and sitting on that porch reminded me to stay calm. The attorney introduced himself, thanked me for my time, and got straight to the point. Mr. Boundary Brooks, we're hoping to resolve this without prolonged litigation." I nodded. "So am I," Melissa finally spoke. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "What would it take?" There wasn't any anger left in her words, only exhaustion. I reached beside my chair and handed the attorney a single folder. No dramatic speech, no threats, just numbers supported by documents. Back payment for unauthorized water usage, reimbursement for electrical costs, compensation for system wear, property cleanup, legal expenses. The total came to just over $58,000. The attorney reviewed every page, looked at Melissa, then back at me. "These figures are surprisingly reasonable." I smiled. I was an engineer for almost 4 decades. We like math more than revenge. Melissa let out a long breath, then quietly asked, "If we agree to this, can we keep using the well until our own infrastructure is complete?" That was the question I'd been waiting for. I slid a second document across the table. "Not under the old arrangement." She frowned as she opened it. "This is a 25-year service agreement." "That's right," I said. "Your neighborhood clearly needs a reliable water supplier, and I happen to own one." The contract was simple. A fixed monthly access fee adjusted over time under standard utility provisions, 100% of maintenance, inspections, repairs, and insurance paid by the association. Any engineering consultation outside routine maintenance billed separately at my professional rate. Miss a payment beyond the agreed grace period, and service could legally be suspended until the account was brought current along with the required reconnection fees. Most importantly, the agreement remained attached to the property, meaning when I was gone, the rights and responsibilities would pass to my children. Melissa flipped through the pages in silence while her attorney carefully read every clause. Finally, he closed the folder and looked directly at her. Legally speaking, this is far less expensive than the alternatives. She knew exactly what he meant. The homeowners were furious. County investigators were asking questions. Her professional license was under review. A courtroom would only make everything worse. She picked up the pen, paused for a moment, then signed her name. Just like that, months of arrogance ended with a single signature. As they prepared to leave, Melissa stopped halfway down the porch steps and turned back toward me. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why didn't you shut the water off the moment you realized what was happening?" I thought about that for a second because it deserved an honest answer. Because your neighbors weren't stealing from me. They trusted the wrong person. There was no reason 80 families should lose water because one leader forgot the difference between authority and ownership. She didn't respond. She simply nodded once, got into the SUV, and drove away. Over the following months, things slowly settled down. The debris dumping stopped permanently. The association installed proper communication procedures. Homeowners elected a new board. A few families even stopped by from time to time just to chat or drop off fresh vegetables from their gardens. Kevin, the young father I'd met months earlier, laughed one afternoon and said, "I guess we're technically your customers now." I laughed back, "Only if you pay your bills on time." Looking back, people often ask whether I enjoyed winning. The truth is, winning wasn't the satisfying part. The satisfying part was proving that experience still matters. Somewhere along the way, our culture started confusing gray hair with irrelevance. I've met 25-year-olds who were brilliant and 70-year-olds who shouldn't be trusted with a screwdriver. Age alone doesn't make anyone wise, but neither does confidence. Melissa made one mistake that cost her nearly everything. She looked at an older man living quietly outside town and assumed he didn't understand the system. What she never stopped to consider was that I had spent most of my adult life building systems exactly like the one she was trying to take advantage of. Sometimes the quietest person in the room knows the most. Sometimes the guy everyone underestimates has already solved the problem before anyone else realizes there is one. These days, I still drink my coffee on the same porch every morning. The well still hums beneath the little pump house. The sunsets over the ridge haven't changed at all. Life is peaceful again. And honestly, that's all I ever wanted in the first place. But every now and then, I'll hear someone say, "He's just an old retired engineer," and I can't help smiling to myself, because I've learned that being underestimated can become your greatest advantage if you're patient enough to let the truth do the talking. So now I'd like to hear from you. If you had been in my position, would you have shut the water off immediately, or would you have gathered evidence first like I did? And do you think Melissa deserved a second chance after everything that happened? Or should she have faced even harsher consequences? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this always spark interesting debates. If you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who appreciates seeing arrogance meet accountability. Until next time, thanks for listening.